Cool. So today we've got Tony de Veyra on the Have You Heard podcast today. Tony, thank you very much for joining Ryan and I. And so you're from the Rodale Institute, doing a lot of research around organic practices and regenerative farming and all of these things. So would you mind just letting us know a little bit about Rodale and kind of what you do there?
Absolutely. Thank you for having me on. I appreciate this opportunity. So the Rodale Institute is a 501c3 nonprofit organization. We were established 75 years ago. The Institute just celebrated its 75th anniversary in the past couple of weeks. It's been really exciting, and it's also been experiencing some really rapid growth recently, which kind of dovetails with the general recognition of organic farming and the role that regenerative organic farming has to play in addressing the resource challenges and atmospheric challenges related to the climate crisis. I'm sure it's an interesting thing for a lot of your listeners. Something a lot of people in agriculture are considering, so all that's really fortunate. But at its core, the Rodale Institute was started to be a research organization to really look at the effects of organic farming and compare it with conventional farming and really get some concrete metrics around why organic farming is better for the environment, better for the farmer, and better for economics and stability than conventional farming. So one of the major things we have in Pennsylvania, where the Rodale Institute was originally founded in Pennsylvania, is we have the longest running side-by-side trial comparing, university recommended standard conventional practices with herbicides and genetically modified seeds and stuff, side-by-side with organic farming systems. Some of those organic systems are also no-till. Rodale recently has done a lot of work in the no-till organic space, developing cropping systems for corn and soy that use cover crops and the roller crimper implement to terminate cover crops and produce a lot of residue and litter on the ground to give you a thick leaf mulch layer that really protects the soil and allows the soil to form its aggregates and nurture microorganisms that have a host of benefits for soil fertility. Myself, I work at a satellite research station. So the Rodale Institute is originally from Pennsylvania, but it has 6 satellite research stations. The one I'm based at is here in Southern California. It's called the California Organic Center, and we manage 5 acres of research plots in Camarillo, California, in Ventura County, which is the next county northwest from Los Angeles along the coast.
Cool. Yeah, thanks for that background. Yeah, I just seen some just media stuff from Rodale about the 75-year anniversary, and it's there was some stuff on Instagram of there was a book that J.I. Rodale wrote when he first founded the foundation and kind of what his intention was, and this is in 1947, so like right after World War II, where all these crazy pesticides and all this stuff really started to like pick up a lot. And he's basically saying like, hey, no one believes us that these things could potentially be dangerous. So now we need to prove it. And so, I mean, 75 years later, I guess like at a high level, when you said the longest running comparison basically of what's going on in Pennsylvania with conventional and organic.
It's about 40 years old. It goes back to the 80s.
Oh, wow. Okay. So like out of that, is there enough data where it's like indisputable now, where it's like, this is very clearly a better way to do things when we're comparing organic and no-till versus conventional?
Yeah, and some of the most dramatic benefits are the least obvious and require more like economic analysis, especially around carbon budgets and stuff to tease out, because everything that supports the conventional farming system are inputs that are basically derived from petroleum, so they inherently have a carbon footprint attached to them, and then also a pollution, like a non-carbon, a pollution-related footprint, because you just imagine a lot of everything related to a petroleum economy. Because like you talk about all the ammonia fertilizers and phosphate fertilizers, these are all, one way or another derived from natural gas or other fossil fuels, like we dug up from the ground. And the same is true for most of the agrochemicals. I mean, agrochemicals are all basically petrochemicals, the insecticides, fungicides, herbicides, etc. So the impacts of those compared to a system that doesn't use those and all the inputs are derived from like what you could say is recent sunshine, maybe the sunshine of just the past several years. So your fertility inputs are primarily cover crops that you grew in previous years. These cover crops grew and they had a lot of legumes as part of it, and the legumes in the cover crop portion fixed a lot of nitrogen and through their root action mined phosphorus from deeper in the soil profile, or in the root, the profile of the ground, and render that into their leaves. And then by you incorporating that into the soil or folding them down with a roller crimper and leaving them as a residue on the soil, you return those nutrients to the active soil layer at the top. The top soil, the top 6 inches is the most active layer of the soil, where you have all these microbes and arthropods and all kinds of life just breaking things down and excreting them and decaying them and making those nutrients available. So all your nutrients, instead of coming from a pocket of sunshine that's like 2,000, 3,000 feet under the ground, and you had to like do this huge drilling to pull it out with a oil well or fracking or whatever, it just came from the previous year's legumes. And that's like at its core probably the best thing you could compare about sustainability. Are we using energy that geology sequestered into the earth hundreds of thousands of years ago, which is non-renewable, or are we using sunlight that hit the earth last year to fuel, power, and feed what we're producing this year, which will feed us or feed our animals or make the fiber that clothes us, make the hemp plants that we transform into all the materials of the future.
Yeah, no, I think it's a wonderful way to look at it. I always tell people that those other fuel sources are thousands of years of stored energy, and the way you're talking about sustainability and using stuff we just made last year is very interesting way to understand it and create an energy in that top soil. So what does Rodale Institute sounds like the right group to be further seeing how hemp can be combined into more dynamic and forward-thinking farm models? Where is that? Where and when has that Venn diagram crossed over? And what work are you active in that the Rodale Institute's working on with hemp specifically?
I started working with the Rodale Institute in January, formally started working with the Institute in January as an official employee. We had some overlap before that, where there were some grants that we collaborated on, and they were all related to hemp, because I myself have been working on hemp-related projects since 2016 in one way or another, and I grew some of the first hemp in California in 2018. We did the first fiber and grain variety trials in California in 2021. And it's been a really interesting journey on the hemp side, kind of seeing the industry evolve and change, going from the initial CBD stuff to now this focused push towards industrial products, which I've always been most excited about and found most compelling. So it's really cool to see that. And also like that feeds into the work you're doing, Ryan. So it's awesome.
And that crop down there in Lemoore, that one was pretty notable. Yes.
Yeah. That was fiber trials from 2021, which was, we had some varieties from Europe, which, were not ideal for California, so they didn't perform. And that I guess you could say that was the part of the trial where we looked at fiber and grain varieties for comparison. And then there were the Chinese landrace varieties, which performed stellarly and they produced 20 to 26 foot tall plants. There were yields upwards of 8 tons per acre of total dry biomass. There was one plot that got up to 10 tons. That was the plot that was allowed to go to flower and had seed heads on it that were harvested. So the crop is capable of producing quite a bit in California. It's very impressive. And it's also very impressive compared to the amount of water, the relative water use. So, they'd crop in the ground for 180 days that produce all of that biomass and all of the, the fiber that can be harvested from it, as well as the hurd, because, if you have hemp, you have hurd. And it used less water than a typical cotton crop would.
And it was a record-setting cultivation, right?
Yeah. It was proposed to the Guinness Book of World Records as the tallest hemp plant. I haven't followed up with it because I wasn't the one like who really took point on pushing that to Guinness, but I don't think it's been contested. But if it is, I mean, it'd be great if someone grows a taller plant. It'd be awesome to just see like world's tallest hemp plant year after year. Someone's always able to grow a taller one for the next 10 years. Then we end up with something that's like 35 feet tall or something.
Right. Then the balance just becomes finding out how to harvest and make the use of those things. But if we can consistently grow 30-foot tall hemp stalks, I'm sure we would manage a way to make the use of the biomass. But that is phenomenal. I was able to go down and see those hemp fields and walk underneath the swaying branches, and it was quite.
It's more like a hemp forest, isn't it?
It is more like a hemp forest. I mean, it could be a tourism attraction just in and of itself.
Yeah, you make like little mazes the same way you'd make corn mazes. I mean, I think it's more effective than a corn maze for sure.
Way more effective, way thicker and harder.
And the advantage of being able to grow really tall hemp plants also demonstrates that you're able to grow through time. So you can plant later and still have a really tall plant. Like you could plant at the beginning of the season, and at the end of the season you have like a 25-foot tall plant, or you could plant 25% of the way through the season you'll plant, and then instead at the end of the season you'll have an 18-foot tall plant. You plant halfway through the season, you have a 12-foot tall plant, and you plant in the last 75% of the season, like say we plant in July, and you could still have an 8-foot tall plant. And the real upside of being able to grow a tall plant is it kind of demonstrates that you have more flexibility in when you can go back and plant, and you could almost adopt more of like a relay type of planting and production system, which would improve the utilization of your processing equipment at the end of the line, because instead of having a massive amount of harvest that comes at the end of the season that has to be stockpiled, has to be inventoried, and then has to be run through, you just have like relatively fresh material coming into a processing facility nonstop, on and on. And then there's considerations on the front end of the crop planting cycle where you have more flexibility in what you can grow in rotation with the hemp, if the hemp can still be planted later in the season and produce like a 6 to 12 or 15-foot tall crop that's economically viable. So if you can still plant in July, for example, and then in September or like October have plants that are 8 feet tall and have an economically viable crop to harvest, then that means that the crop that comes before the hemp could be wheat. Like you could have a winter wheat that's growing throughout the spring and then ripens, and you harvest it in the end of June and July, and then you just seed into that wheat stubble your hemp, and your fiber hemp grows. So there's interesting things that it unlocks, and I think that's the most interesting and underrated aspect to those Chinese varieties. I sometimes call them subtropical varieties because they come from a lower latitudes, so they have different reactions to the photo period than we're used to with like European varieties. Because with European varieties, there's only the planting window is basically March through May. If you don't plant March through May, you're not going to get something that's viable for the most part. Maybe you could do something and get something that's viable for grain production, but that's like a different animal, right?
That is very interesting. So as far as the role that hemp is playing in adding to farmers' versatility in their planting and stuff, is there any region or specific crop rotations that hemp pays particular advantage to?
So, returning to the Rodale Institute and the background of the Rodale Institute, the Rodale Institute has been working on hemp related research at its Pennsylvania main campus since, I believe, 2017 or 18. So it's been several years. For the most part, they've mainly grown European varieties, and the interest of Rodale in hemp is looking for a third cash crop that could grow that has the potential to, in the long term, grow to the size that corn and soy have. Because as so many of your viewers know, there's two main cash crops that really dominate U.S. agriculture, and it's corn and soy. And the rotation for many farmers across our bread baskets, like the Midwest as a whole, like the Midwest could be broken down into a bunch of different subregions, but for the most part, if you go from Minnesota to Louisiana, that's like the Midwest. I'm relatively uneducated about it as a Californian who's only ever lived in California, but my my sort of understanding of agriculture in the rest of the country is Midwest agriculture is massive, and it makes the scaled farms we have here in California look like toy-sized. In particular, like a large farm in California is a couple thousand acres. That's like an average to small size farm in the Midwest that's doing corn and soy. And many of those farms are just doing corn and soy. Some of them are just doing corn back to back to back to back. And then, market conditions will push them to doing soy back to back to back to back. And that's like not environmentally sustainable. It's entirely propped up by like the mining sunlight energy system, like fossil fuel energy system we were just talking about, right? So that's why every organic systems plan for converting a farm to certified organic production has the farmer doing at least 4 crops in a crop rotation. And the big question for Rodale as a think tank and as a thought leader in organic agriculture has been, what are those 2 other crops besides corn and soy that farmers can grow that will make that rotation balanced? And for the most part, the third crop has been wheat in many regions, but it's not possible in all regions. As I've been informed by people who know more than me, there are many regions in the Midwest where wheat's not really a viable crop because it's just too wet. Excuse me. But, just say at face value, wheat is the third crop, then the thing we work towards is that hemp can be that 4th crop, and we can have a very stable, 4-wheeled crop rotation, organic and sustainable, of corn, soy, wheat, hemp. and there's particular upsides to fiber hemp. Excuse me. Sorry about coughing.
Yeah. Well, now, with all the research that Rodale's doing, like, is there some farmers who have looked at that research and been like, all right, we're going to do this on a larger scale? Like, what's the current landscape as far as and Ryan as well, like, of how many farmers are actually using hemp right now as a rotation crop in any capacity for any of its
feedback I've gotten from our consulting team? The thing they've most been impressed with about hemp is how clean the field that comes in after hemp is, because hemp is just so effective at suppressing weeds and keeping the weeds down for the season that it grows, that the next season you plant into a crop, especially if it was used to grow fiber hemp or a dual purpose variety, which grows very tall and has a long period of shading out the ground, you have a field that's very clean and needs a lot less interventions in terms of tillage or herbicides or whatever to clean it up. And
so growing hemp fiber can be like a reset on your field, and even turning fallow land into. And just an anecdotal story from like Kentucky. They used to have diary entries from farmers and stuff who would say, their most difficult land, that stuff today you would have to bush hog and things like that. They would just broadcast spread hemp, and it would choke out large areas, and they'd grow hemp for 2 years or so on an area, and then cut all that down and bring it down to grow another crop that was, needed easier conditions to grow in. So they called it like the frontier fiber, because it would, clear the frontier as you grew fiber, which is just amazing.
That's an amazing use, and like a I like to call it an eco-synergistic use and ecologically synergistic, right? Because we want to identify synergies in nature and lean into them and use them as wisely as possible in our in our systems. And that, like, pretty much how we engineer our world now as humans, and that's what humans are. Humans are engineers. We're ecosystem engineers. We need to lean as much as possible into the synergies that nature has exposed before us, because nature evolution, however you want to call it, has had many millions, billions of years of crashing things together through accident and fate, and the synergies fall out and stick. And that's for sure one, in terms of hemp being a way to clean up a weedy field. And as a crop, like, hemp is pretty comparable to corn in terms of being like really nutrient hungry and nutrient scavenging. But a key difference is that while hemp is growing, it's actively uptaking and finding all the nutrients it can in a field, and it's got an aggressive taproot and roots that spread pretty heavily and feed heavily. And when you have hemp planted densely, the way fiber hemp is, there's only one to five growth points on each plant that are actively growing, because the canopy space is closed up. They're competing with each other. They're growing straight up like this. So it means that all that nutrient it's finding is going up through the cambium, through the stem, producing all this leaf material, and that's where all the nutrients are. All the nutrients, the phosphorus, nitrogen, potassium it was mining, go into those leaves. And if the plant is primarily growing upwards, every time it grows upwards, it has to make new sets of leaves. So leaves that had those nutrients in it lower on the plant naturally get shed, and underneath the canopy of a hemp forest, like what we were talking about, like in Lemoore, you just see a whole lot of leaf drop. It's like, that's another reason why it resembles a forest, because the floor of a forest, it's also like a bed of leaves. Like you walk around under an oak tree, it's oak leaves, or pine needles if it's a pine tree. And that's what it's like under a densely planted hemp fiber. So even though it's aggressively using and sucking up all the nutrients, and this is part of the reason why it's also really good at remediating things you don't want, like heavy metals, right?
Right,
It just sucks things up. It's rapidly shedding some of those things through its leaves. So, which means that if you keep it in its vegetative growth state, which is producing the fiber component, then most of the nutrients that the plant uptaked, and many of those nutrients will be things that were just in the soil and were available. But some of those nutrients would be things that many other cash crops would not be able to find, because hemp is so aggressive in finding the nutrients. But most of it ends up back in the top soil, in the top section, as leaf mulch, and will be available to your next crop. And this is part of how hemp sort of prepares a field for your next crop, and why historical records have shown that crops grown after hemp have higher yields. Like there's studies out of Spain where they find significant yield improvements in wheat grown after hemp. So it becomes not just a way down in San Luis. Yeah, it becomes not just a way to produce a carbon-rich material for making into all kinds of advanced manufacturing, like the herds, right? But also a way for farmers to manage their nutrients in their fields. So yeah.
Well, I'm always amazed by the ingenuity of plants that you think aren't so alive around you. They've thought very well about how to stay alive and how to promote their growth, and I appreciate your explanation and wordsmithing there to get the ideas across. I think it is. I've always been so enamored with deciduous trees that lay their leaves down as mulch for the following season. A hemp plant does that throughout its growth cycle, which is even more ingenious, I think. When it's in a crowded field, like you're saying, it drops its lower leaves as it's growing, which leads to less lateral branching, leading to a better single stock fiber when you are growing for that method. And then at the end of the cycle, we, as the cultivators, will chop it down and defoliate the plant and put all those leaves. And it is hard to explain that to people. The different methods of cultivation and how you work with those leaves will lead to how it actually gets left on the field. But if it is mining nutrients from way down deep, putting them in the leaves, and then returning those leaves back to the soil, it is like those hemp plants are preparing for its next generation, which naturally, if you leave hemp in a ditch or in a field, like it has done since it's been growing in ditchweed for many of these places that it grows for a long time, it'll continue to prepare the ground and then drop new seeds and cultivate itself and refine its genetics in some capacity to perform better in wherever it's at. But that is truly fascinating. Is there any crops in particular, like some of you were mentioning? I know in Colorado we've heard stories about it improving potato production down when they rotate it down in the San Luis Valley. Is there
That's a very interesting one I hadn't thought about. Potatoes are a big crop here in California too. More specialty type potatoes and probably a lot of seed potatoes, actually. I think about it. Planting potatoes. There's a really interesting kind of structure and regulatory body around how potatoes are multiplied, and it's all like by generation, because potatoes are something where it's incredibly easy to spread disease with potatoes. I mean, like the Irish potato famine and blight, it's like
that's why I'm here.
Yeah, as we know. So it's regulated, so you can only replant and reproduce potatoes a certain number of generations before you have to go back to certified clean stock that was made in the lab.
Wow.
And those multiplications are done, I believe, mostly in fields here in California, because California is a lot of production in California is around, seed production, nursery stock, propagative material for the farms that have tens of thousands of acres in like the Midwest and other parts of the country. But that's really cool that people are seeing hemp and potatoes in rotation. That's one I had not thought of, but it makes sense. There's old published documents like from the 20th century where they were talking about hemp being able to alleviate problems with nematodes, and nematodes are a pretty big issue for potatoes, I know.
Right. Yeah, combating diseases for plants that they grow in rotation with. Is that, you mentioned California being like a kind of a producer nursery state for other states. Do you see them playing a similar role in hemp due to its restrictions on large scale hemp cultivation in many of the regions in California?
I think there's a role, and it's a very interesting and specialized role, particularly when we talk about the subtropical type of hemp. And, to sort of make an amendment to what I was just talking about with fiber hemp, scavenging resources and basically cycling nutrients, that changes once the plant starts flowering. Because once the hemp plant starts flowering, all the nutrients it has uptaken and has been aggressively finding, it wants to put those somewhere now. It's the seeds. And as we know, hemp seeds are extremely nutritious, extremely nutrient dense, really high in protein. It's like 30% protein, 30% essential oil and fatty acids, right? Well, what is protein? Protein is nitrogen. That's the backbone of protein, amino acids, which have nitrogen in them. So once you go to the flowering stage, all these nutrients that the hemp plant was uptaking and was physiologically cycling that we just discussed now has a place to go and concentrate into, and that's the flower head and eventually the seed pods. So from this reason, hemp that flowers and produces seeds, so what you could say is dual purpose hemp or just specialized hemp for grain production, has a very different role in agronomy and in crop production from fiber hemp. Because now you go from a nutrient hungry crop that can scavenge nutrients and cycle nutrients to a nutrient hungry crop which is going to concentrate nutrients in the seed, which you're going to harvest and remove and put into the supply chain. Because hemp seeds are very valuable. It's much more valuable to harvest it than to leave it out and leave it as bird food. And it's going to go into like human food, especially in specialty human food products. So that changes things fundamentally, and it's just very important to note. And then when we talk about the context of the subtropical varieties, these like Chinese landrace fiber varieties that can grow like 20 feet tall, or you can plant pretty late and still make really big plants. The reason they're able to do that is because of when they start flowering. So when we talk about the botany of the hemp plant is what's called a short day plant. Short day plants are plants that respond to days getting shorter by going into their reproductive phase. So they have like distinct phases of growth. When the days are getting longer, they try to get as big as possible. It's just like grow, 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 grow. And when the days get shorter, the plant's reaction is winter is coming. It's time to make the next generation, because my body's not going to survive winter, but the seeds will. So that's when they initiate flowering and start making seeds. So when you look at varieties that come from Europe, were bred in Europe and maintained and honed in Europe for that region, the process of flowering and making seeds and setting seeds takes anywhere from 45 to 70 days, depending on variety. It can be shorter or longer. 45 is probably like about the shortest to go initiate flowering, buds develop, pollen drops, pollination, and then seeds form and you have mature seeds. So if you have already a relatively short growing season because you're at a high latitude, like say in Poland or Central Europe or wherever, and your growing season is only from May through end of August, September, and it takes 45 days to make that seed, then you have that much time minus 45 days to grow a tall plant that can make the fiber that you want, right? When you go to the tropics or the subtropics, like, Yunnan, southern China, or basically like Thailand, where these regions are,
Right.
and the growing conditions are good throughout the whole year. Like like the hemp plant can grow all the time, nonstop, but because it came from like hemp originally came from Central Asia, like basically where the Mongols are, around that area. That's where the earliest like origin of it. So it's like kind of coded into its nature to go into reproductive phase in reaction to the photoperiod changing. So when that plant got to southern China and started to localize and adapt to those regions, it realized like, oh, I don't need to start flowering until like the equinox, until the days are 12-12 or about 12-12, and then really like I can kind of take my time flowering, setting seed, and I can even make really large seeds if I wanted to, because the growing conditions are going to be good all throughout September, October, November, December, even into January. And that's what we see with these Chinese varieties. They don't start flowering until September 21st, and like days need to go under 12 hours for them to properly flower. The flowering period takes longer, the flowering time takes longer, and the individual seeds are larger, and the seeds they make are significantly larger. Like some of these seeds are almost the size of like a soybean. They're that big.
Wow.
And the time to make a seed takes like 70 to 80 days. So what that all leads to is you have a plant that won't flower until September and takes 70 days from September. So you won't have seeds until like December. There's not many regions in the continental US where you can do that, short of building a greenhouse or something. California is one of those regions. Southern Arizona, South Texas, maybe Florida. But in Florida, it's like you can have problems with like humidity. But that to me sheds what the role for California could be. It'll be propagating, planting seeds of these, unique subtropical fiber varieties and making them available for the industry to scale up in the Midwest for fiber production.
Well, that's awesome. We have a diverse. A lot of times you have to go to different countries to find those conditions to propagate seeds in your specific climate and stuff. So luckily we have such a wide-ranging landscape here. Hopefully we should be able to kick things up a notch with hemp processing in America. And with that being kind of the lead into the next question, with everything the Rodale Institute's doing and the hemp industry as a whole. I know you're less involved directly in pushing the hemp industry forward as you were before, but what do you, Tony, see as the biggest hurdles right now? Like why farmers are not growing large scale hemp, and what's being done or what could be done to clear those hurdles and bring the scale of the industry up?
The thing that, like, farmers don't turn hemp into money, processors do. So processing facilities are what take hemp in one end and turn it into materials that can go into a supply chain on the other end. And when things get transferred, when the materials change hands with someone that can turn it into an actual product with the supply chain, money is actually made. And farming takes money. So, the main thing that'll drive hemp happening, it can't be farmers. I mean, as enthusiastic and into it as farmers could be about, doing a new crop because there's like interest and challenge in taking on something new. I mean, I'm sure there are many farmers who get bored with just doing corn and soy like all the time. Like I've heard stories of farmers in the plains area who've grown hemp for years, and it's purely just so that they have something that's a little bit different, like a little project on the side that's different from their day-to-day normative stuff.
Right.
But to take that interest and turn it into a real industry, it's going to be a processor, not that farmer. So a processor has to build a facility so that the farmer has a place to take their hemp and turn it into something that can make them some money. And if it can make them some money, then that combined with the on-farm benefits they're seeing in terms of their environmental sustainability and their soil metrics getting better and reducing their inputs because they have a cleaner crop the following year, will be huge. And that'll really push the thing forward. And then, that's on the back end. On the front end, it's availability of seeds, which you just mentioned about many seeds are only available as imports from other countries. Like that's not going to build a sustainable industry long term. Like we can't be reliant on other countries for our building blocks. Like we need to create domestic seed production. But even domestic seed production is still downstream of processing. So it's kind of like the processors who take the hemp and turn it into materials for the supply chain to make products for the consumers. Like they need to ripple their demand current all the way up the supply chain to affect the farmers and then to affect the seed suppliers who are upstream of the farmers. And then even affect the breeders who are upstream of the seed producers.
Right. Yeah, I feel like a lot of farmers are, lacking that instruction on how to grow a proper fiber. I've talked to some of the consultants that help people transfer to regenerative farming through Rodale, and I think that's excellent to give farmers better insight into how to prepare a viable fiber stock for sale. The only issue that comes up with processing, as we all are aware of, is shipping the material too far. You can't have someone growing hemp in Wisconsin hoping to have it processed down in Missouri, or the cost will be lost on the margins will be lost on the shipment of it. So that'll hopefully whenever there's a processor, that's always just the issue with processing or having reliable amounts of material in a region. You want to have like a plan for having enough to make sure your processing facility is in a good place. But once there is a processor in a region, hopefully it'll unlock more and more farmers in that 200 to 500 mile radius to work with hemp as well.
One advantage that the Midwest has, and I mean, this is a little speculative that I'm speaking of here. So people in the Midwest can inform me if I'm ill-advised here or whatever, but I've always thought that the biggest advantage that the Midwest has when it comes to hemp production, hemp processing, and being a hemp supplier, not just for the U.S., but for the entire world, is the Mississippi River. Because the Mississippi River and barge traffic is the cheapest way you can transport things, period, like at all. Like it's cheaper than trucks, and rail is cheaper than trucks, and barges are cheaper than rail. And then the only thing that's probably cheaper than barges is ocean-going vessels, and that's just because its economies of scale, they're so much bigger. But you can go directly from a barge to an ocean-going vessel. Like it's kind of straightforward. So,
very much so.
There's part of me that's always thought that's always thought that, like, once you're on the Mississippi shipping network with river barges, a lot more things become possible, because something like hemp stalks, or say just like hemp herds or hemp or baled hemp fiber or whatever, which is relatively shelf stable and can be transported like long ways, and it doesn't care if it's on a barge floating around slowly for like a month or whatever. It can go anywhere on that river system, and all kinds of different factories that turn things into widgets or clothing or whatever can all be sited there and access herd fiber from anywhere upstream of it, and that's like tens of millions of acres of farmland. And that's
Certainly.
the most exciting thing about reindustrialization of fiber hemp in the Midwest to me. And that there might even going up a step of just raw stocks, maybe that changes some math around raw stocks. It's probably doubtful still, but again, if it's cheap enough to just float things on a barge, then maybe it's possible to put baled stocks on a barge and float them down to someone who has a processing facility just downriver. But then the question is, how'd you get it from the farm onto the barge? Like, that in of itself might be a cost that invalidates the whole theory.
Well, no, you're right. I mean, when you're looking at the bubble of where you can grow and how efficient it is, usually that bubble is not really a circle. It's more of a lines that follow highways and things. When people that shortens the distance greatly. When you can get things places faster or cheaper. But the Mississippi should be the great highway of the Midwest, connecting processors and farmers and manufacturers. Yeah, it definitely has been.
It's
America's
been
got
the engine of wealth for America for basically the duration of America's existence.
No, I agree. We had a much more enamored past with canals. They obviously tried setting up the great canals to go along the Potomac to the Great Lakes and connect the Erie and the whole eastern coast. And I think Thomas Jefferson actually sent out explorers to go find the Great Lakes that would be part of our mapped out, countrywide canal system. And when they found out the Rockies had little tiny lakes and no great river system, they ditched, building a U.S. wide canal system. But that is definitely the Mississippi is our great canal, and hopefully it will be reignited as far as a manufacturing vein for farmers and processors and manufacturers to make materials from hemp. I think that's definitely the hopes with many regions with hemp processing, is to grow and then process and then turn it into something in the same place. There's a lot of speculation that might have been what got hemp in trouble in the first place. Was there were people doing just that in unregulated parts of the country that weren't formally colonized yet. Yeah,
that's there's a lot of stuff in the historical record about hemp. It's pretty interesting, when many things that can be made from hemp can be made from petroleum or lumber. It gets you thinking about alternative ways we could have developed our economy. But we're getting there now. We're moving towards a more bio-based and renewable economy now. Many things in the pike to move us along that direction, and I believe hemp will be a big part of it.
I agree. So, Tony, what hemp material or product or something you're working on and you'd like to see worked on, or something you think made from the materials that we're talking about that would be super helpful maybe to another industry, or an innovation you think will really propel the hemp space? With something
hemp building materials is what's always excited and inspired me the most. I don't have any experience in the construction trade, so it's entirely as a layperson. But when I as a layperson think about what could open up the most possibilities for people and for humans just living on this planet, it's building affordable, sustainable, fireproof, mold-proof, insect-resistant housing. And that's like the promise of a lot of hemp lime is, and that's what makes hemp lime so compelling and some of the new sort of hybrid concepts of hemp lime and hemp spray insulation and different materials like that could be so meaningful for our next phase in development, because we have a massive housing shortage here in California. California is massively underbuilt, my home state. We have a huge homelessness problem and affordability problem because of everything from poor planning to structurally bad incentives around property taxes that have made people try to turn their houses into asset bubbles and piggy banks that just balloon in terms of valuation, and not want to allow people to build more housing so that they can have a place to live. But you combine that with the materials that we built with in the 20th century were basically cardboard and garbage and extremely flammable. And we have like disasters like the Paradise Fire, where pretty much everyone who is near that fire is probably going to have some kind of cancer, because all the chemicals that went up in the fire just like infected everyone's lungs. But if all those homes were made out of hempcrete instead, they would be fireproof, they would still be standing, and there wouldn't be like toxic fumes. So that's the biggest thing for me. That's really inspiring, and I think is like almost infinitely sort of scalable, because like I think across this country we need houses, and then if we don't need houses across this country, we need insulation, because there's no shortage. There's like a bottomless well of things you could think of that would be improved by insulation. Your greenhouse. If 3 of the 4 walls in your greenhouse were insulated, that greenhouse would be way better. And you don't have a greenhouse, you probably should, because like right now, California does all the heavy lifting in terms of producing vegetables for the rest of this country. And it's absolutely not sustainable, because California producing vegetables and putting them in the national supply chain to show up in grocery stores near where you are today in the Midwest, or I think you were just at a Panera Bread, Ryan. So like the salads that were on the menu there at that Panera Bread were probably grown here in California or in Mexico. And a salad green is 97% to 99% water by volume. And we have a huge water shortage here in California. So even if you exclude all of the effects of just like the process of growing the vegetable here and how much water that took, and you just think about the water embodied in the actual product that left our watershed to go to St. Louis, and many regions in the Midwest have relatively abundant water compared to us. So you have the water you need to grow these vegetables. It's just like our economic system hasn't been economical to do so. So a big part of the change is like people need to build greenhouses to grow these vegetables to keep the water in the watershed in the region that it's in, so that people can have access to healthy vegetables. And even hempcrete can be a part of it there, because it's really cold there. So what do you need when it's really cold? You need an insulated greenhouse. You need hempcrete, hemp lime in the greenhouse walls. So if we no longer, for whatever reason, need fireproof, highly insulated housing, we can start using hemp lime in greenhouses so that we can have local vegetable production.
Well, I love it. I feel like supplying and producing our own products goes hand in hand with the self-sufficiency in our own food supply. And I think it's fantastic to learn more about this and what the Rodale Institute's looking at, and really appreciate all the explanations on everything. Matt, do you have any other questions for Tony while he's with us?
No other questions. I think just a couple comments on the last section there. Like, the climate emergency is such a big topic on the national scale all the time, and people always point to like temperature increasing and things like that, and there's obviously a lot of contention on that on both sides. And it seems to me like it's the real climate emergency is with stuff like this, like inefficiently allocating resources in California just because it's working right now, and supplying the rest of the country. Yeah, the water in terms of topsoil, like that's not really a part of the conversation. on like a national scale a lot of the time for people who aren't in it, like people who aren't in the farming community and care about regenerative farming. Like, I don't think people know that there's like a topsoil emergency, and that's arguably way more important and urgent, like need to be addressed than something like the average temperature changing over the past 100 years and things like that. So I think it's important to kind of just isolate like what actually matters and what's important here, and at the same time where hemp steps in and can actually provide legitimate benefits there. And then the housing thing, it's like, it seems like that's a common thread. Like when we talk to people, it seems like building materials are what everyone is most optimistic on in terms of like right now. And we can see it. We see it increasing with, hemp texture in their facility getting built in Idaho and everything, all the different like building contractors are doing stateside, and it's all hemp fiber coming from overseas. Like, these people don't want to be importing their hemp fiber. They want to be growing it here. So it's like the chicken or the egg situation that we always talk about with the processing and the farming. You would think that things are starting to kind of come along where there's reason for investment on the processing side of things. Like, there's demand there specifically on the herd and fiber for insulation, where it's like, doesn't seem like it's too far away where there's about to be, and Ryan, you would obviously know a lot better with this, but like, doesn't seem like it's too far away that there's going to be a large influx in investment and just capital into processing, because that seems like that's really what's needed the most.
Yeah, it kind of, if you're going to the well to get water, your jug is your processing capacity. That's how much water you can carry back to the village. And people don't. If you're going there with just your hands, it's a great journey. You're going to learn a lot. You're going to know which direction to get there next time, but you're probably not going to get much back. But yeah, no, it kind of sets the capacity for how much hemp needs to be grown and how much hemp can go into the market. And I've been accused of being a bit conspiratorial, but I tell people all the time, that's the people that don't want hemp to succeed. That's what they've targeted. They've made sure those machines don't exist. If everything else develops all around it and there's no link there, it won't exist. So hopefully, like you said, Tony, we are tinkers and engineers. The word cotton gin, actually it's a gin is short for engine, a cotton engine. We need a hemp engine to drive this industry. I do agree, working on it, and hopefully it does become the reality. But it seems to be a kind of a resounding answer that we need to see. It's been through the ages. Before in Williamsburg they were using a ox or donkey driven roller crusher stone, and then early colonial advancements led to a hemp brake and a steam powered hemp brake and roller breakers, but it kind of stopped there. So definitely need to we're not the only ones working on it. Hopefully people all over the world are, but it doesn't seem like it. So hopefully things pick up on that front. But well, excellent, Tony. It's always good. It was great to see you out in California, and really appreciate you coming on to explain more about your expertise and how hemp is, a great rotation, a great agricultural and bio tool to invigorate land and make the best use of it. And hopefully these other things we discuss continue to line up and get put in place, so we have a ever growing hemp space here, and then we can all go back to trying to make all these cool things out of hemp that we hope exist in our future.
For sure. It's been great being on. Thank you so much for having me. It's been a pleasure.
Yeah, thanks, Tony. And we'll link some stuff in the description of the video, because RodaleInstitute.org has a bunch of resources for not just like if you're a farmer, like if you're at home and you want to have a no-till garden in your backyard, grow your own vegetables. There's a lot of resources and
or if you're just a consumer
things
who wants to, have some information about maybe making better choices about what you purchase and what you can support with your dollar, because every dollar is basically a vote. That's basically like how our political economy works. We're so used to thinking like, we go to a ballot box and vote. And it's like, no, you vote every day with what you buy with your money. Like what?
Yeah, we know that voting's a joke, Tony. Yeah, greenback ballots around here, bud. We get it.
what you purchase says a lot about where your intent is.
Yeah, absolutely. And there's a
No, I
lack of
agree.
education there, I think, in some parts where people don't know that they're like perpetuating the big oil industry by, you know, buying conventionally farmed vegetables and things like that. So it's, without going too woo woo about all of it, there's connections to everything. So
Right.
it's like
Yeah.
the
I
Rodale
mean, I think
Institute.
the bigger thing is bigger than being avoiding coming off as too woo woo is you don't want to be too preachy and too like self righteous about it too, because that's the number one way to turn people off. Because everyone knows someone who's like too like the self righteous hypocrite is like a very standard like character and sort of like caricature we all have dealt with, you know.
Yep. Yeah. So if anyone listening is interested in kind of learning more about this stuff, RodaleInstitute.org, we'll link it in the description, and you can spend a lot of time learning on different things there. And yeah, Tony, thank you very much for coming on. Hopefully we do this again in the future and kind of just get an update on continued progress at Rodale.
Awesome. Again, thanks for having me, guys.
This is Ryan Doherty, Matthew Soares, and special guest Tony de Veyra signing off from Have You Heard?